Chapter 9. An Axe or a Stone? Like one continuous screech, the Starlings shrieked their war cry as they flew speedily through the trees. It reverberated and echoed throughout the valley, causing their captives to quake and freeze in fear. Ruuna had never heard such a shriek before, and neither did any of the others. The young mouse maiden could feel the sound resonate through her head and chest, causing her to remain planted. She looked up to see that two of the Starlings had begun to approach with ropes and talon. She tried to get Belle's attention, but even lifting her paw off her large ears for just an instant nearly caused irreparable damage. Using her foot paw instead, she tapped on Belle's, grabbing her attention for only a moment. It was all Belle needed, and soon she saw a path out. Belle nodded at Ruuna and Quint, who had now noticed what was about to happen, and stamped her footpaw 3 times. Instinctively, Quint realized that it was an escape attempt, and readied himself to run. On the 3rd foot tap, all 3 began running, causing the others to follow when the ropes went taut. As a boulder rolling down a hill through wild grass, the young woodland slaves plowed through the birds towards freedom. King Starlift saw the attempt, and he seized hold the tail ends of the ropes with his talon. With his larger size, he easily held back the advance of the escape attempt, causing every creature in line to jerk to a sudden halt one by one. As she ran, Belle felt a sharp tug from the rope around her wrist. She turned to see that Ruuna and the others had met the same tug, but had been yanked backward instead of breaking through the ropes. One by one, she watched as each of the others also halted from the binds that still held them in line.
Flowers and fur. No use stopping now. I'll come back soon. I promise.
Quint watched as Belle kept running, able to voice his opinions now that the screeching had finally subsided.
She's running off without us!
Quint turned to see that Ruuna's paw was hurt from the sharp yank she had endured as she pushed herself upright. She grunted painfully, barely able to hold back tears. Quint was about to rush over to help, but paused when he spotted Cecil hurry to her aid.
Dreaded claws. Ugh. We shouldn't have run. What?
Quint looked up to see that a Starling had landed before him, a rope in his claw, ready to bind and lead him away. To where, Quint thought, but only the Starlings would know. The last thing Quint saw were dazzling stars after a good conk from the blunt of a spear beat on his skull like some primal drum, knocking all sense out of him. Ruuna watched as Quint's body fell limp and collapsed horribly to the ground.
Quint! Leave him alone, you...
Soon, Ruuna too lost all sense of consciousness after receiving the same fate. Slagg was being attacked even with his 3 weasel hoods trying clumsily to defend their leader from beak and talon, receiving all manner of cuts and bruises. Realizing that he might be outmatched, Slagg called for retreat, seeing that their situation was futile.
Get your good-for-nothing scruffs down! Follow on to that brush if you want to live, you rattlebrains!
But what about those slaves?
Stubb asked tiredly.
Yeah, won't the kitten be upset about not having slaves to show?
Continued Scratchnose teasingly.
Shut it. They'll be no good to him if we're dead.
Realizing that Slagg was right, the slave drivers made themselves invisible to the Starlings as they used their power of camouflage to hide in a nearby bush. As she hid, Belle could hear the screeches and calls of the Starling warbirds, unable to make out what was said, but knowing all too well what their angered screeching meant. They were outraged that one of the prisoners had eluded their grasp, but they had naught of an idea that Belle was hidden in an undergrowth close to a cave. She watched from the cover of the bush, holding her breath until the birds had finished their scout. Letting a relieved breath out, she turned toward the entrance of the cave, hoping to find a place of temporary refuge.
Phew! Those nasty birds aren't as sharp as they look.
Suddenly, Belle was now met face to face with the nervous grin of a hedgehog, who she thought was not there before. He stared at Belle with big, soft, and round eyes of hazel, a small black nose resembling a wild blueberry, dressed in a button-up tunic with cut-off sleeves and a well-worn set of brown trousers. He waved nervously as Belle stared, hoping to break her out of the trance-like state. It was an awkward moment, but when Belle stumbled backwards, she let out a gasp of dismay. It was cut short when the hedgehog valiantly leaped to catch the much larger badger and cover her mouth.
Shh! They're still out there, you know. We gotta keep low and quiet.
Belle understood, nodding her head decisively when she realized that he might be on her side. The hedgehog let off Belle's mouth as he helped her upright again. Now, whispering in an undertone, he pointed to the cave's entrance.
Follow me to that cave over there. It's out of the way of them birds.
They won't see us in there, will they?
Nah, it's too dark. Besides that, they're too dumb-witted to fly any claw or feather in there anyhow, even if they could see.
The little hedgehog held back a giggle as he spoke. Swiftly, the two creatures slipped deep into the cool shadows of the cavern, out of the sight of any prying starlings. It was so dark that Belle couldn't even see her own two paws out in front of her. As her eyes began to adjust, she could just make out that the hedgehog had stopped and crouched to pick up two small, jagged white quartz stones. With the crack of the two minerals, some sparks sprinkled forth onto a piece of dried moss, causing a red glow to emit deep within. The hedgehog gently took the smouldering moss as it fizzled and crackled ablaze, bringing it to a patinaed metallic candle holder with an oil-soaked wick held in its pincer-like grip. Soon the whole fissure was alit with the warm glow of the light fixture, reflecting the deep viridescent hues of greenstone. The walls were remarkably smooth, yet slightly swelled in some places, with an almost dusty sheen to it. The tall ceilings were filled with stalactites of various sizes, while its floor had been nearly polished smooth, as if it had been dusted and swept clean. Belle could see that the level, rocky surface of the cave went on for some distance.
What is this place? It's so huge.
This is the cave I grew up playing in. We used to play hide and seek in here, my friends and me. Since then, I've met my soulmate, and along with a few other friends, we decided to take this cave as our home, away from them nasty birds. They think they own all the land up there, they do. Right, just around the bend, but keep quiet. The little rascals will get riled up from their nap.
The hedgehog warned as he led the way down the cave. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks, nearly causing Belle to stumble straight into him.
Did you spot something?
Hardly. I just remembered. I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Quill.
The charming hedgehog held out an outstretched paw as he turned to meet Belle with an endearing smile. Perplexed at the sudden stop just to introduce oneself, Belle gathered a moment before speaking.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Quill. My name is Belle.
The two shook paws before rounding the bend. As she did, Belle paused and was awe-stricken with fear. There in front of her were two beasts nearly double her own height. One had wide shoulders, wearing nothing more than a vest and a cloak, but the other figure was more obscured in the shadows. Belle gasped when she saw the red glow of two shining orbs turn to stare at her. It was as if she was staring at some giant, vicious, otherworldly thing. Quill looked at Belle's statue-like state waving his paw in front of her to gather her attention.
Are you all right, Belle? You look as if you've seen one of them birds.
She tried to stammer out a sentence, but fear gripped her like the pincers of a beetle's bite. The ominous figure began to approach the two in a slow, almost gentle-like manner. Soon he stopped close to Quill and bent down into the firelight of the blazing candlewick. It lit his features, displaying his small round ears, his large, shiny black nose, and a black mask of fur covering his eyes. Belle felt that he somehow reminded her of her own kind, with his enormous size and slow movements, though she was still off-put at this new creature who she had never seen or heard of before. His visage was surprisingly round, yet concerned, and his voice was deep, yet well-tempered.
Quill, who have you brought with you this time?
She's called Belle, Raker. I found her running from the birds outside.
You can't just keep taking in every creature you find out there. Still, this one does look quite small and young yet.
Belle hated being called small by bigger, older creatures. Letting her anger overtake her fear, Belle found herself defending her smaller stature.
I'll have you know that I'm bigger than most of my other friends.
Oh, leave her alone, you big oaf. She's had enough to handle without you pestering her.
A new voice beckoned. The creature that the voice belonged to now took her spot next to Raker. Belle could just see that she too was just like Raker, but was instead donned in a modest yet well-loved dress that had been torn in several places at the hem. The light from the candle-holder lit up her beautiful pearl-green eyes and the motherly curiosity in her expression.
Don't you mind them. They're the friends I was going off about, Raker and his partner Coona. They were trapped with nowhere to go, cornered near the cave entrance. I couldn't just let them birds take what wasn't theirs, so I snuck them in here.
The hedgehog said, with delight painted all over his features.
Aye, but you can't just coop every creature you find in here. And besides that, weren't you out looking for rations? Did you find anything?
Is your stomach all that's on your mind?
No, I'm just thinking of the littler ones is all.
Right, I'm sure.
Belle couldn't help but wonder what these two creatures in front of her were. Soon she had mustered the courage to ask.
I beg your pardon, but I've never seen anything like you before, other than perhaps my own father. But he doesn't look much like you. What creatures might you be?
With a nearly bewildered look on their faces, they soon resolved to explain their appearance, both taking turns recalling their stories.
Well, we're called raccoons, sweetie. Our forefathers and mothers are from a land far off from here.
Yes, many seas and lands away. They came here in search for a new life, I think.
And I'm from an isle to the west myself. It's not too terribly far away, but I won't go and ramble about that now. I ended up bumping into my dilly yet good-hearted husband here, and the two of us...
Oh, right. We found our home here, along with Quill and his family. Say, where's he gone off to?
No one had noticed that Quill had snuck deeper into the cave amongst the discourse, through the draped bedsheet veiling the entrance to a larger expanse that served as the home. It was a tall open space, with a small hearth in its wall at the rear of the room, still smouldering with old coals, a large wicker basket that seemed to hold all that they had resting to its right, and bedsheets and blankets, some neat, some messy, all heaving just in front of the hearth at the center of the misty room. Quill wandered quietly around the messy pile of quilts on the floor, where light was leaking in from a small crack way up in the cavern ceiling. He knelt down near where the makeshift bed had been laid out. The hedgehog father deliberately reached down to unveil slowly and carefully a small spiny head from under one of the quilted blankets. He hesitated as he stared at her small form, calmly caressing her cheek and brow as she slept. Suddenly she sneezed, causing Quill to recoil his paw quickly back to him. He remained before her, still as a statue, hoping that he hadn't yet awakened her.
She's been asleep with the others for some moments now. It would be best not to wake her.
In the light, another hedgehog named Pearl appeared beside Quill, leaning onto his shoulder as she crouched.
They took you out again? Getting them asleep, eh?
Quill whispered, now in a calm and gentle tone. The hedgehog wife nodded lightly at her husband's remark. Belle was taken aback by the soft voice that emanated from Quill. It was so different from his usually well-spoken and cheery nature. She and the two raccoons had quietly entered the dwelling and remained behind the two hedgehogs so as not to wake the others.
I'll tell you, it won't be easy for him if we continue living under them birds.
Quill commented quietly.
Is there anything I can do to help?
Belle asked tiredly, now watching as Quill brought the blanket back over the tiny quilled head sleeping on the floor.
Not much we can do, seeing as we're just a few creatures compared to an army of warbirds.
The voice of the young hedgehog wife said bluntly. Coona noticed Belle's exhausted posture and made mention of it.
In any case, I don't think there's much that can be done with sleepy paws about. Oh, my goodness. You look as if you haven't seen a good night's rest in seasons.
I'm not that tired. Maybe a little bit. But I can't sleep with my friends out there. Oh, they'll be trapped by those awful starlings by now.
At hearing this, Quill grew a softer look. Raker straightened his posture when he realized that he had an idea that came to paw.
Well, Quill, perhaps you can find these friends of hers and have them spy out their ranks and posts.
Just then, Quill had an idea of his own that sprang forth, and a wide, brilliant smile emerged.
That way, we could know where to station an attack and get them all free before the next full moon.
Along with that, mayhaps you could learn something too, about any provender weaknesses or allies.
Coona suggested, nudging at her partner's round belly. Pearl had also approached, not wanting to be left out of the conversation. With a level head, she warned,
That may be too dangerous for you, Quill. Besides, I don't think a sleepy badger would do much good to help that.
In the warmth of the soft quilt blankets that covered the floor, Belle was found now sleeping comfortably by the others. Coona gently covered her sleepy form with a quilt end as Pearl brought up an important suggestion.
I think that for now, we should take some time to think about it all and enjoy some home hog stew I've prepared.
Ah, you're right,
Quill said reluctantly, wishing so dearly to plead his reasoning, but knowing all too easily that his well-meaning wife Pearl wouldn't understand his selfless and sometimes restless spirit. Perhaps a good hedgehog could spot the young badger's friends in the morrow, he reasoned, as he found a bowl of stew.